period ended on the 21st of February, with over 1,400 responses received. I thank the member for the question, which allows me to announce that I have received the consultation report at the end of last week, briefed Cabinet colleagues on its publication at the beginning of this week, and I can now advise Parliament that the consultation report will be published on Transport Scotland's website this afternoon, and I will share the link with all the relevant North East and Highland constituency and regional MSPs.
Liam Kerr.
I'm very grateful, but almost 5,000 days, 16 transport ministers and 14 years since this government promised to dual the A96 between Aberdeen and Inverness, we finally get a publication date for a consultation. So, Cabinet Secretary, when the consultation results are released this afternoon, will that come with a cast-iron commitment that the A96 will finally be dualled?
Cabinet Secretary.
So as I indicated in the round table that I referred to, it was my intention, at the request of MSPs, to ensure the consultation report was published as soon as possible. But in relation to our ongoing commitment to dual the A96, any decision will have to be made in the context of available planned budgets and obviously the impacts of this week's UK Government spending review and the Scottish Government's investment and infrastructure plan refresh anticipated for later in the year. Presiding Officer, I didn't want to delay the consultation report being published because that's what MSPs had asked me to do, and I have done what I said I would do back in February.
Thank you. We must conclude general questions at that point. My apologies to those members we have been unable to reach. And before we move to First Minister's question time, I invite members to join me in welcoming to the gallery the Honourable Raj Johan, Speaker of the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1 I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, President Officer. Violent and disruptive behaviour in schools is getting worse. A small minority of pupils prevent the majority from learning in peace and in safety. Some teachers feel unsafe, many feel unsupported. The SNP's naive and weak approach fails absolutely everyone. And in response, they've just published this new guidance on behaviour in schools. And really, it's exactly what you might expect from this ineffective government. 49 pages of tedious, hand-wringing nonsense, complicated and confusing. And when John Swinney was Education Secretary, teachers said he issued too much guidance which made their jobs even harder. So why is he now repeating the same mistake?
First Minister.
President Officer, it's always my priority to listen to the teaching profession. I did that throughout my time as Education Secretary, and the guidance that Mr Finlay has cited has been a consequence of the work that's undertaken by ministers in consultation and dialogue with the teaching profession and other stakeholders in the world of education to make sure that it's effective and necessary to support our education system. The guidance is founded on an important point that Mr Finlay made in his question, that the disruption and disruptive behaviour in schools is the product of a minority of pupils. And the challenge, and what the guidance is focused on, is making sure that we have in place the necessary steps and measures to ensure that any disruptive behaviour is addressed so that the overwhelming majority of young people who behave perfectly well in schools and engage well in their schools are able to prosper in their education. Russell
Finlay.
Well, if John Swinney had really listened to teachers, it does seem that he's then just gone on to completely ignore them. Because if you take a look at this report, what does it say should happen if a pupil commits an act of violence? Well, the report tells teachers to give violent pupils laminated bullet points, telling them to think about their behaviour. And it also suggests the way to tackle unsafe behaviour is, and I quote, a conversation to jointly problem-solve with the child. And it also says that disruptive pupils should be allowed to leave class 2 minutes early, which to me sounds like a reward rather than a punishment. Now, the new guidance ends with 94 questions that teachers are supposed to ask themselves. 94 questions, as if they've got the time. So on behalf of Scotland's teachers, I've just got one question for John Swinney. Is this for real?
First Minister.
I don't think for a moment that Mr Finlay's presentation of the guidance is in any way, shape or form representative of what is actually there. And what the guidance is trying to do is to ensure that situations where there is violence in our schools are addressed, where problems are de-escalated, that they are resolved, because what we have to do is to make sure that every young person who engages with our education system is able to be well supported to fulfil their potential. Now, for some young people, that will be associated with disruptive behaviour, which has to be addressed. And that's precisely what the guidance assists the teaching profession to try to do, with the assistance of other resources that the government has put in place into our schools to address underlying causes of unacceptable behaviour by young people. So what the guidance is designed to do is to de-escalate situations in our schools to ensure that young people can participate in their education, because if young people are unable to participate in their education, they are unlikely to go on to good outcomes in our society, and we will simply repeat the difficulties that we've seen for many years of young people who do not go on to positive destinations. And of course this week we saw that we have another very high level of positive destinations being achieved by young people in Scotland.
Russell Finlay.
Well, I'm very confident of my interpretation of this document, and I'll let the teachers and pupils of Scotland decide what's in here. My party has long argued that a stricter approach is necessary to restore discipline in schools. We believe in exclusions for violence because they protect staff and pupils, and because they work. The new SNP guidance says exclusions should only be considered as a last resort. And when they are considered, teachers still need to follow guidance introduced by none other than John Swinney in 2017. That guidance has a 66-item checklist for teachers to consider when going through an exclusion process. So where does the SNP actually stand on this? Have the U-turned and now support exclusions to tackle bad behaviour, or do they not even know themselves?
First Minister.
President Officer, the guidance is crystal clear that exclusions are part of the approach that can be taken. But I'm making it clear today that exclusions can have negative consequences for young people. So Russell Finlay says that exclusions work. Well, if a young person is excluded from school, they are not in the safe environment of school. They are therefore likely to be out on the streets, and therefore potentially able to become involved in some of the criminal activity that Mr Finlay himself has put to me within the last fortnight at First Minister's questions as being a risk to which young people are exposed. So I simply point out to Parliament the inherent contradiction in what has been put to me today. The contradiction between Mr Finlay one week saying we must make sure that young people are not exposed to criminal activity, and this week he's demanding we exclude more young people from schools and put them at risk of that criminal activity. Now, for the record, Presiding Officer, in 22-23, which is the most recent figure I have available, there were 11,676 exclusions recorded in Scottish education. Now, that is lower than it was in 2018-19, I accept, but it is still a very high level of exclusion of young people from our schools. And we have to consider what are the implications of not getting our approach to inclusion correct in our schools, because the damage to young people in our society can be long-term as a consequence.
Russell Finlay.
That was absolutely desperate. As the First Minister knows fine well, there are different types of exclusion rather than just putting children onto the streets, as he suggests. He virtually stopped exclusions, and that's causing discipline to collapse. He turned teachers into social workers. He sent a dangerous message to disruptive pupils that they can get away with it. He fundamentally changed the classroom culture, and that is now harming children and their education. People in the real world know how to sort this out. We need a tougher approach, not laminated cards and inclusive chats. If pupils are violent or serially disruptive, exclude them. Will John Swinney end the barrage of guidance and please empower teachers to take a stricter approach?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr Finlay has said something to Parliament that is palpably false. Mr Finlay said that I had stopped... Yes, I'm going to explain it to Parliament. Mr Finlay said that I had stopped exclusions in Scottish education, and I have just told Parliament there were 11,676 exclusions in 2022-23.
Let's hear one another.
So that statement from Mr Finlay is false. Now, well, OK, it's false. Let's just agree it's false. Now, the second point I'll make on this question...
Let's hear the First Minister. ...is
that last week after First Minister's questions, the Justice Secretary and I convened a discussion at which Sharon Dowie, the Conservative spokesperson on justice issues, was present, amongst a whole range of different stakeholders. And I would sum up that conversation, a whole variety of different people involved in violence reduction, Medics Against Violence, all those organisations who are doing really good work to avoid violence in our society and to de-escalate exactly what I'm talking about. Not one of them said to me that I should increase the level of exclusion from schools. So what we are getting from Russell Finlay today is a demonisation of young people and a failure to address the mechanisms and the interventions required to solve a difficult issue in our society. It is simplistic nonsense, and Parliament should ignore it.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, last week John Swinney claimed that he became aware of issues facing Alexander Dennis a few weeks ago and was doing what he could to help the company. But that is not true. John Swinney received a letter almost a year ago directly from the company setting out how his decision to buy buses from China instead of from Scotland was putting the company and jobs at risk. He did nothing for the skilled workforce. But last week, as usual, he tried to find someone else to blame for his own failure by talking about UK procurement laws. Laws that did not stop Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham from buying Scottish buses, but somehow stops this SNP Scottish Government. Since that warning almost a year ago, how many buses has the SNP government ordered from Scottish companies?
First Minister.
Mr Sarwar is correct that I engaged with the company in August of 2024 when I received correspondence from the company, and I met them again in September. And as a consequence of that interaction, we established work for Scottish Enterprise with the company to support the company in securing its future. So that work was taken forward as a consequence of that dialogue, and obviously the company then contacted us in the course of the last few weeks with their more immediate situation. In relation to bus orders, since 2020, Alexander Dennis has secured orders for more than 360 vehicles through Scottish Government funding programmes, and Manchester have ordered 160. So 360 through Scottish Government funding programmes, 160 from Manchester. I hope that indicates that the Scottish Government has been supporting Alexander Dennis.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, John Swinney did not answer the question. Since that letter almost a year ago, 0 buses ordered from Alexander Dennis. 0. So he can try and waffle all he likes, but he can't escape from the fact that his government has the powers and the resources to act, but has failed to do so. The Cabinet Office has clearly set out how the SNP Scottish Government could have helped ensure contracts go to Scottish manufacturers to support Scottish jobs. He could have applied social value criteria, which helps domestic suppliers, or he could have considered a direct award. He did neither. Now, with the UK Procurement Act, the SNP government can disregard bids from non-treaty suppliers, which includes countries like China. So did John Swinney not understand the law, or was it the usual SNP attempt to pass the buck, find somebody else to blame, and show no interest in actually doing his job?
First Minister.
I think if Mr Sarwar was to look carefully at what the company themselves have said, they've expressed their appreciation of the engagement with the Scottish Government on all of these questions. So the company, who are the only ones I'm interested in here, are the company and the workforce. The company have expressed their appreciation of the sustained engagement of the Scottish Government in supporting their operations. Now, of course, through a number of different schemes that the Government has put forward in Scotland, we've provided £58 million of funding for zero-emission buses since 2020 through the Scottish ultra-low-emission bus schemes and the Scottish Zero-Emission Bus Challenge Fund. So that just fundamentally holds Mr Sarwar's argument, because what that all contributes to is the fact that the Scottish Government has allocated 360 bus orders through our funding programmes to Alexander Dennis.
Let's hear the First Minister.
And that has been part of supporting and assisting the work that is undertaken at Alexander Dennis. Now, the Scottish Government...
Mr Bibby, thank you.
The Scottish Government, as I explained to Parliament last week, is engaged in a sustained dialogue with the company, with various other interested parties, to support Alexander Dennis. Those discussions are ongoing. We are talking to the company and engaging with the company on a regular basis to find a way through these challenges and to encourage more orders to come to Alexander Dennis, and that's at the heart of the approach the Government is taking.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, the workforce don't need engagement from the Scottish Government. They need contracts from the Scottish Government. Jobs come from contracts. And the reality is there have been 0 buses commissioned since that letter from almost a year ago. So the SNP needs to up their game rather than the usual waffle, because it just proves why Scots are sick of this SNP government and its incompetence. After 18 years, they're out of ideas and out of time. Now, I told last week how a fortnight ago an SNP MSP said that John Swinney had 2 weeks to come up with an idea to save his leadership. So let's look at what he's come up with. 1 in 6 Scots on an NHS waiting list, John Swinney's big plan,
Sarwar.
an app that's been promised years ago, and the merging of just 2 health quangos. Are schools facing a behaviour crisis? John Swinney's big idea, laminate bullet points and put them on the wall. Scots angry at their failures and the SNP back in crisis. John Swinney's big plan, quick, press the big panic independence button to try and save my skin. Isn't it the case that we will only create jobs, only save our NHS, only improve our schools and deliver for Scots if we get rid of this tired and incompetent SNP government?
First Minister.
Isn't it interesting that Mr Sarwar's interest in the workers of Alexander Dennis lasted 2 questions, and then he gets on to his usual posturing in this Parliament of little substance that is before us. That's the performance of a weak man in front of Parliament today. So, Let's hear one another. I'll tell Mr Sarwar what I've been doing this week. Presiding over a government that's delivered, for the 10th year in a row, Scotland at the top of the list of inward investment successes in the United Kingdom, other than London and the South East. 10 years in a row under this SNP government. We've seen a rise in positive destinations for school leavers. We have confirmed this week that we will scrap the 2-child cap, ensuring 20,000 children will be lifted out of poverty. In the same week as we commit ourselves to lifting the 2-child cap, Anna Sarwar is toadying in behind the Labour leader in the United Kingdom to send 50,000 children into poverty with a welfare reform bill. Scotland can see that Anna Sarwar is linked to a UK Labour government that will put more children into poverty when my government will lift children out of poverty. That's the Scottish Government delivering for our people.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
Nearly 2 months ago, the First Minister hosted a summit about opposing the far right and defending democracy. And there was a clear message from many people in the room. Governments need to act to address people's concerns, to restore the public services we all rely on, to give local communities more power, to tackle extreme wealth and to tax the big polluters who are profiteering from climate breakdown so that we can invest in our communities. It was obvious that without clear action, this would just be another talking shop. But I can see no meaningful change since then. What exactly has the Scottish Government done differently in practical terms since that meeting to turn promises into action?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, what the Government has done is take forward our agenda, which is about eradicating child poverty. And I've just cited one of the examples, which is taking forward the measures to lift the two-child limit, which will lift children out of poverty. And that's in stark contrast to the prevailing attitude of the United Kingdom Government. We have been working with different groups to make a rational argument for an approach to immigration that will boost our working-age population, recognising that unless we do that, we will suffer extreme economic harm and real difficulty in sustaining our public services. We have taken forward the steps that were announced this morning on carbon budgets, for example, where we are following the setting of the budget limits by the Committee on Climate Change and deploying a programme which will tackle climate change. So those are some of the measures that the Scottish Government is taking to ensure that we address the substance of the agenda, which I agree with Mr Harvey, there are real concerns about, to make sure that we are addressing the real concerns and the real priorities of people in Scotland and to address that threat from the far right in our democracy.
Patrick Harvey.
Well, it sounds as though the Government's agenda after the summit is exactly the same as it was before the summit, and there is a real sense of drift from the First Minister. He came into the job saying he wanted to build the best future for our country, and since then he's watered down rent controls, he's stalled on the plans to help people get off expensive fossil fuels, he's abandoned progress on human rights and equalities laws, he's ditched environmental actions like a new national park, and just today he has rejected advice from his independent climate experts. And in place of the progressive green policies the First Minister has walked away from, what? I genuinely struggle to think of a single signature policy that shows ambition and leadership that he's actually delivered in his year in the job. In the face of the threat from the far right, a steady-as-she-goes approach is a course to disaster. So does the First Minister understand that people need to see real progress toward a fairer, greener Scotland, and that failure to tackle inequality and injustice will only benefit the snake oil sellers on the far right?
First Minister.
Well, I couldn't disagree more with Mr Harvey, to be blunt, and I appreciate this is his last First Minister's questions as co-convener of the Green Party, so maybe this is the last hurrah to say it all to me today. But can I just say to Mr Harvey, one of my priorities, a central priority for me, has been the eradication of child poverty, and it couldn't be clearer to people in Scotland. There's two very different directions being pursued here. Scotland is seeing a falling level of child poverty when the rest of the United Kingdom is seeing child poverty rates go up. We are taking action to remove the two-child limit, committed to under my leadership, never committed before, so we've taken that step, and that will help us to reduce child poverty, while the Labour Government acts, with the welfare changes announced yesterday, to increase child poverty in Scotland. So I'm going to make no apology to Mr Harvey or to anyone else about being absolutely focused on eradicating the scourge of child poverty in our society. That's a curse in our society, and we've got to eradicate it.
Question number 4, Audrey Nicholl.
To ask the First Minister whether he will provide an update on the Scottish Government's latest engagement with the UK Government regarding funding and timescales for the development of the Acorn carbon capture and storage project.
First Minister.
So it is welcome that the UK Government have at last listened to the calls of industry and the Scottish Government and have committed to funding the Acorn project to progress to a final investment decision. We are working closely with Acorn partners and the UK Government to understand the specifics of last week's announcement and how we can best work together to build pace and momentum in the development phase to get a final investment decision on Acorn as soon as possible. I want to be clear that I firmly support the development of the Acorn project to advance our climate ambitions and create jobs and employment, and we are discussing with Acorn what support will be required from the Scottish Government to progress the project further.
Audrey Nicholl.
I thank the First Minister for his response. And after years of delays, the UK Government has finally announced some funding for Acorn, yet it has failed to commit to a timetable or a final investment decision on the project. This stands in stark contrast to Labour's £22 billion for carbon capture in England and a swathe of costly nuclear projects. So given that Westminster has had 20 years to hammer out the detail on Acorn, does the First Minister agree with me that we must now see meaningful support and funding at pace?
First Minister.
President, I agree with Audrey Nicholl. It is vital that we have urgent progress and support for this project. I welcome the announcement that was made last week. The Scottish Government will play our part in ensuring that we can progress to a final investment decision as soon as possible, because this project is central to the achievement of our objectives on climate. It will be a significant part of the just transition within Scotland, and it provides significant economic and climate opportunities for our country, and it should be embraced by all concerned, and it particularly needs emphatic support from the United Kingdom Government.
Brief supplementary, Liam Kerr.
The Scottish cluster does need meaningful support. Years ago, the SNP promised £80 million to help bring it online, with no strings attached. Later, the SNP introduced a condition that it would only be paid when the UK Government promised funding, and then the Green Party blocked it anyway. Now that the UK Government has met the retrospectively imposed criteria and the Greens are, thankfully, out of government, when will the Scottish cluster get to the £80 million that was promised?
First Minister.
That commitment to £80 million remains intact from the Scottish Government, and in the programme for government I indicated that the Scottish Government would be open to providing additional financial support to ensure that the project is able to progress. Now, as I said in my opening answer to Audrey Nicholl, that we are working closely with Acorn partners to understand the specifics of last week's announcement and how we can best work together to build pace and momentum, and that's exactly what we'll do.
Brief supplementary, Mercedes Vialba.
The Scottish Government does my constituents in the North East no favours by making promises it won't keep. If the First Minister is serious about the use of this technology in this site, and has been for a number of years, why did the ScotWind leasing round award seabed rights for the Marham wind farm on the very same site as the Acorn project? And what is he doing to remedy this?
Minister.
I'll have to take away the issue that Mercedes Vialba raises with me. The ScotWind leasing round has been completed in an orderly process with decisions made based on the evidence that's available to the Government. I'll consider carefully the point that she is making to me, but I don't think there's any incompatibility between the approaches that have been taken.
Question number 5, Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports that up to 100 truckloads of Scotland's waste will be moved each day to England as a result of the landfill ban on biodegradable waste.
First Minister.
President Officer, I do not think it's acceptable for a large amount of waste to be transported from Scotland to England. The landfill ban will be a significant step in reducing methane emissions in Scotland, a greenhouse gas that is around 28 times more potent in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide over a 100-year period. Preparations have already been made for the ban coming into force, and the vast majority of councils have solutions in place. In the run-up to the ban, I accept all partners to continue efforts to comply with the ban. I appreciate there are challenges, and I can assure Mr Golden that we are working closely with the waste sector and exploring several options to ensure that we are reducing as much as possible any environmental impacts.
Maurice Golden.
Thank the First Minister for that answer. The landfill ban has been over a decade in the making, with an extra 4-year delay already. Yet Scotland still isn't ready. The 2013 recycling targets remain unmet, even though recycling is the solution, in my view. Sadly, incineration has become the default for the Scottish Government. Next year, up to £75 million in landfill tax will be lost to the UK Treasury. £75 million in revenue lost from the Scottish Government, and tens of millions of pounds in cost, primarily to Scotland's SMEs. It's the ultimate farce. So, First Minister, how is this failure to plan, invest or deliver
standing up for Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, Presiding Officer, the default position is not incineration. The overall recycling rate in Scotland of 62.3% in 2022 is at its highest level since records began in 2011. So there is significant progress that's been made, and waste sector emissions were 73% lower than in 1990 in 2023. So the steps have been taken to address this issue. I want to make sure progress is made. That's exactly what ministers are focused on, and it's what public bodies should be focused on too.
Supplementary, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. In 2019, my colleague Willie Rennie warned the then First Minister Nicola Sturgeon that meeting our landfill ban would result in waste being shipped across the border to England. His concerns were dismissed, and it pains me to say it, but Willie Rennie was right. So can the First Minister perhaps tell the Chamber how his Scottish Government would respond were hundreds of truckloads of waste from England being dumped in Scotland on a daily basis?
First Minister.
Well, as I said in my answer to Maurice Golden, the Government is focused on working with public authorities to ensure that the terms of the landfill ban are delivered and secured. That's what the ministers are working with the sector to ensure is the case, and that's what will dominate our approach in the weeks to come.
Question number 6, Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister whether he will provide an update on the Scottish Government's position on the funding of Scotland's higher education institutions. First Minister.
The Scottish Government engages closely with the higher education sector on a variety of issues in relation to its financial sustainability. I know that the member, alongside other party spokespeople and the Minister, met with University Scotland last week and agreed on the need for cross-party collaboration to support a thriving and financially sustainable university sector. One of the key points in that discussion was the importance of protecting free tuition, a commitment that is made absolutely by the SNP Government to ensure that students studying in Scotland do not incur additional debt of up to £27,750 if they happen to be educated at universities in England. The 2025-26 budget includes over £1.1 billion of investment in teaching and research in Scotland's universities in recognition of the hugely valuable contribution our universities make.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. Today's report from the Royal Society of Edinburgh says there remain significant challenges in ensuring those undertaking education can access the right opportunities to fulfil personal aspirations as well as to contribute to the future success of Scotland. And that challenge to fulfil aspiration is laid bare in data this week showing the gap in university attendance between the most and least deprived grew, and the proportion of young people from the poorest communities going into positive destinations fell. Yesterday, Glasgow Kelvin College, 40% of whose learners are from the poorest areas, told committee they are having to turn 2 in 3 people away. The SNP's managed decline of universities and colleges in Scotland is leaving Scotland's most disadvantaged pupils behind. So can I ask the First Minister, why is his government stifling the potential of Scotland's greatest asset, our young people?
First Minister.
Well, the most recent data that I have available shows that we have 16.7% of full-time first-degree entrants coming from Scotland's most deprived areas, which is an increase on the previous year from 16.3%. So we have taken a number of steps since we embarked on the work about widening access to ensure that young people from the most deprived areas are able to access university courses. That's exactly at the heart of the Government's commitment, and I'm very pleased to reaffirm that today. There has been a 42% increase since 2019 in 18-year-olds from the most deprived areas entering university, and that demonstrates the progress that's been made on widening access to our higher education institutions.
Brief supplementary, Miles Briggs.
Officer, from the comments made at Education Committee by university principals, it's clear the university sector in Scotland has become over-reliant on international students. Now, given the increasing global uncertainty we are seeing, what assessment has the First Minister and Scottish Government made of the financial exposure and risk now facing our institutions in Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, these are issues that are discussed with the higher education sector. I met with the senior figures from University Scotland a few weeks ago to discuss these very questions, and my ministers are engaged on this question at all time. I think the other issue which has to be borne in mind here, as well as global uncertainty, is also the approach to immigration policy of the United Kingdom Government. That is not helping one little bit in all of this. And it's clear to me in my dialogue with the university sector that a more rational approach to immigration, rather than the folly that was started by the Conservative government that's now been reinforced by the Labour government in the United Kingdom, would help our university sector to navigate their way through these challenging times. And that will, so a more sensible approach to immigration would help us to attract international students and support our university sector, which remains world-class.
Thank you. We move to general and constituency supplementaries. The more concise we all are, the more members will be able to take. And I call Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's now been more than 4 months since the Scottish Government committed to exploring the purchase of Ardrossan Harbour from Peel Ports. However, talks appear deadlocked. Until the future of the harbour is resolved, Arran will not receive the lifeline ferry service it needs and deserves, while Ardrossan will struggle. This afternoon, constituents from both communities are protesting outside this building. First Minister, the Transport Secretary will meet the protesters this afternoon. Will the Scottish Government now inject some urgency into this process to break the stalemate? And can he confirm that there are no plans to remove road-equivalent tariff tickets from island visitors, which would inevitably damage our island economies?
First Minister.
On the road equivalent tariff point, no, it's been an essential part of the steps that were taken to improve connectivity with the island communities, and it's been a central part in lowering the cost of travel to our islands over a number of years, and introduced, of course, only by an SNP government as part of that agenda. Now, in relation to Ardrossan, I entirely understand Mr Gibson's concern. This is, of course, a negotiation with a private organisation, Peel Ports. There has to be, like any of these negotiations, that takes time. It has the focus and the attention of ministers and CMAL. The Transport Secretary has made clear to Parliament the steps that have been taken, and we will, of course, update Parliament when that negotiation progresses. But I assure Mr Gibson, and he can convey this to his constituents, and I know the Transport Secretary will do that in her discussions this afternoon, that the Government is absolutely focused on a long-term solution for Ardrossan Harbour, which, from the Government's perspective, remains the key port for the connection to Arran.
Katie Clark.
All ferries have been running from Ardrossan Harbour since January, and that will become permanent unless there is redevelopment. There has been no progress in redevelopment, despite it being agreed more than 7 years ago. This is a disaster for the local community. Does the First Minister agree that process for a compulsory purchase of the harbour needs to start if there isn't progress by the summer recess, so that redevelopment work can start?
First Minister.
I will explore the point about compulsory purchase, but what's being indicated to me is that we would not have the basis to do so. But I do assure Katie Clark, as I assured Mr Gibson, that the Government is actively engaged in the dialogue to acquire Ardrossan Harbour to enable the long-term commitment to be given that Katie Clark seeks. And I give that long-term commitment. I understand the challenges about access to the port and the necessity of redevelopment, and the Government has concluded, after years of engagement, that the only way to progress on that is acquisition. And that's what the Government is intent to do, and we are taking every step to enable that to be the case.
Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, the Department of Work and Pensions assured people that the managed migration from legacy benefits to universal credit would be smooth. My constituents in Motherwell and Wishaw have contacted me regarding being threatened with sanctions if they do not provide a GP fit note within 7 days, despite previously receiving employment and support allowance. This should not happen. It's causing needless pressure on primary care and causing fear and anxiety for my constituents with long-term health conditions. Will the First Minister engage with the UK Government over these reported issues and the delays in migration from legacy benefits to universal credit?
First Minister.
So the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice recently wrote to the UK Government highlighting a number of issues with the delivery of universal credit, including those caused by conditionality and sanctions. We're deeply concerned about the personal impact that the move to universal credit is having on individuals, and we will continue to work with the DWP to address all of those concerns. I think this is, of course, indicative of the agenda that has been taken forward by the Labour Government, which is now trying to balance the books on the back of sacrificing the poor and the vulnerable in our society. I don't think people in Scotland expected that of a Labour Government, but that's what they're getting.
Jamie Halker-Johnston.
It's just been over a year since John Swinney publicly apologised to Ailey Beaton for what he described as her terrifying experience at Portree Hospital on Skye. He said that it wasn't good enough, that Sir Lewis Ritchie's recommendations on restoring urgent care must be implemented, and that is what will happen, he claimed. But a year later, incidents keep happening, and last week NHS Highland admitted that the current model for urgent care isn't working. Skye SOS NHS campaigners told the West Island Free Press it was shambolic. One said, "They have been pulling the wool over our eyes all this time." John Swinney was actually on Skye on Monday, pressing the flesh for an SNP by-election campaign. But to their disappointment, he didn't meet with local health campaigners. So can I ask the First Minister why he didn't find time to meet with those fighting to get urgent care restored at Portree Hospital, whether he accepts the promises he made to the people of Skye, made in this chamber, haven't been delivered, and when they will be?
First Minister.
Well, I was actually in Portree on Saturday, as a matter of factual accuracy, and I met Ailey Beaton on Saturday in Portree. And I heard about her experience, and it was a pleasure to meet her, and I was able to express to Ailey and to other members of the public that asked me about this issue that the commitments that I gave in this chamber to the delivery of the model that was designed by Lewis Ritchie will be fulfilled. I accept there are challenges for NHS Highland in the practical delivery of that, often because of the availability of personnel to do that, which is part of a wider and deeper problem, which also relates to the point I made to Mr Briggs a moment ago, that we are being constrained by the approach to immigration and the size of our working age population in the delivery of our public services. Now, this is a very hard reality that Parliament is going to have to come to terms with. It is troubling me enormously in the delivery of public services. So let me say two things to Mr Halker-Johnston. First of all, I appreciate the engagement I had with members of the public in Portree about this issue on Saturday. And secondly, I reaffirm the Government's commitment to the model that was designed by Lewis Ritchie and which I expect NHS Highland to implement.
Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week, Professor Sir Jeff Palmer, Scotland's first black professor, passionate advocate for equality, and my friend, passed away. Sir Jeff was not just a leader in science and human rights. He was a kind, wise man who inspired me and many others. He will be deeply, deeply missed. Will the First Minister join me in paying tribute to Sir Jeff, a giant of modern Scotland, and will he continue his legacy by helping build a Scotland which is free of prejudice?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I associate myself unreservedly with Mr Chowdhury's comments about Sir Jeff Palmer. Sir Jeff Palmer was a pioneer, is how I described him on his death, and he has contributed enormously to making Scotland the country that it is today, the tolerant, inclusive, welcoming country that it is, epitomised by the approach and the values of Sir Jeff Palmer. Mr Chowdhury described Sir Jeff as a kind, wise man, and I utterly accept that. That is exactly the right description of Sir Jeff Palmer. We need more kindness and we need more wisdom in our society, and Sir Jeff Palmer embodied it. And I take this opportunity to make clear to Parliament my absolute commitment to making sure that Scotland is a tolerant, welcoming and inclusive country that Sir Jeff Palmer could be proud of.
Michelle Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The CBI has downgraded its growth forecasts for the UK this week, warning that rising costs, including the Labour Government's National Insurance tax hike, are set to cause weak business investment, reduce recruitment and reduce economic growth over the next 2 years. Does the First Minister share my concern about the impact of Westminster economic mismanagement and what the impact it will have on the ability of this SNP Scottish Government to work to grow our economy?
First Minister.
President Officer, I think the points that Michelle Thompson puts to Parliament are absolutely valid. It's a warning from the CBI that should not be ignored. I said when the decision was taken to apply employers' national insurance contributions that I thought it was an illogical move, given the focus on growth within the United Kingdom Government's agenda, and I reiterate that point. I think employers' national insurance contribution increases will stifle growth, and they will inhibit our ability to grow the economy. That survey from the CBI comes in a week where EY have confirmed that Scotland is the best performing part of the United Kingdom for inward investment outside of London for the 10th year in a row. So what I'd say to Parliament is, despite all the obstacles put in our place by a Labour government, a United Kingdom government that doesn't act in terms of growth and opportunity in our economy, the decisions of this SNP government are delivering prosperity and opportunity for people in Scotland, and that record of investment, 10 years in a row of being the most successful part of the United Kingdom for inward investment outside of London, is a testament to the efforts of this government.
Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Numerous trains have been cancelled across my region in the last year. This has a massive knock-on effect on individuals, organisations and businesses. It's over 3 years since the SNP government took over responsibility for ScotRail, but unfortunately we have yet to see real improvements. Therefore, First Minister, if you want to reduce carbon emissions and get people out of their cars and onto public transport, the Scottish Government must provide a reasonable and reliable service. So when will that dream become a reality?
First Minister.
Well, I literally can't believe half of what's put to me by that question. ScotRail is one of the best performing rail networks in the United Kingdom, and its performance has improved since it was taken into public ownership by the Scottish Government. So let's
hear one another.
I'll just say those things again. ScotRail is one of the best performing rail networks in the United Kingdom, and it has improved since it came into public ownership. And we've just taken a decision to abolish peak rail fares in Scotland to encourage more people to go onto the train. Why can't Mr Stewart find something to welcome within the Scottish Parliament, rather than come here with bogus information that runs down the rail network, which is actually performing very well?
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. And the next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Marie McNair. And there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and the public gallery to do so.
Thank you. The next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 17647 in the name of Marie McNair on Action Mesothelioma Day 2025. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Marie McNair to open the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to be leading this debate for a fourth year on Action Mesothelioma Day. Members will know the huge importance of this issue to me and my constituents, and this debate is an important chance to raise awareness of this cruel disease and highlight where we still need to push for action. I thank colleagues from across the Chamber for supporting my motion and speaking in this debate. This issue deserves cross-party support, so it's very welcome that this has been achieved. Presiding Officer, can I ask everyone to join me in welcoming the Clydebank Asbestos Group and Asbestos Action to our National Parliament? It really means a lot to have them here to support today's event. Both groups have been assisting asbestos victims for many years and have campaigned relentlessly for truth and justice. The Clydebank Asbestos Group, who I am grateful to have a close working relationship with, have been working hard for my constituents for the last 33 years, always there for victims and their families at the time of greatest need. I am so appreciative to have them within my constituency and will be forever grateful to them for the work they do. Mesothelioma is a cancer that is usually caused by exposure to asbestos fibres. Can I congratulate Action Meso and all the support groups up and down the country on their efforts to raise awareness of this disease. Unfortunately, since our last Meso debate, we have sadly lost our amazing volunteer, Kate Ferrier, on Hogmanay last year. Kate was a volunteer with the Clydebank Asbestos Group for over 5 years and shortly after joining took up the post as Secretary. Kate's passing is a huge loss and she will be incredibly missed by all who knew her. Kate chose to volunteer with CAG when she retired, drawn to the charity because of her support for her father, following a diagnosis of an asbestos-related disease. I'm so grateful for Kate's dedication and commitment to supporting victims of asbestos exposure and their families over many years. Clydebank, part of my constituency and my hometown, has an appalling asbestos legacy, and it's once been described as the mesothelioma capital of Europe. And that's why Action Mesothelioma Day is so important to my constituents and our town. Held this year on the 4th of July, it is a national event to raise awareness of asbestos and mesothelioma, to raise vital funds to support the research into tackling mesothelioma and to remember and support those who have been impacted by the disease. In last year's debate, I highlighted this disgraceful 3-year time bar, which has denied justice for those who receive a diagnosis of mesothelioma. This time bar means that if a person is diagnosed with pleural plaques, a usual asymptomatic condition, they have 3 years to raise a claim for damages, even if they later develop mesothelioma. This is an appalling injustice, so it's welcome that the Scottish Law Commission have now published a report on the issue which recommends resolving the pleural plaques time bar problem so that an asymptomatic condition such as pleural plaques will no longer result in a time bar preventing recovery of damages for a later developing symptomatic condition such as mesothelioma. The potential for people to be denied justice because of a 3-year time bar has no place in a just compensation system. And that is why I have secured a meeting with the Clydebank Asbestos Group and the Justice Minister, Siobhan Brown, to progress this issue. And we want the Scottish Government to implement the recommendations as soon as possible, as justice delayed is justice denied. My partnership with the Clydebank Asbestos Group is strong and has shared goals in the campaign for truth and justice. Issues like a more compassionate and responsive social security system compared to that previously provided by the DWP. The phased removal of the asbestos from public buildings, starting with schools, and I'm firmly on their side in support of the Cape Must Pay campaign. Never has there been a stronger example of greed for private profit being put before the safety of workers. And unfortunately, this is the motivating factor in so many asbestos exposures and exploitation of workers. The campaign demands that Cape Intermediate Holdings, owned by Altrad, donate £10 million to mesothelioma research. Cape Intermediate Holdings was one of the largest asbestos companies in the world and is reported to have played a large part in the increase of asbestos-related diseases and mortality across the UK. After a lengthy court battle, documents were obtained proving that Cape hid the true dangers of its asbestos products in the 1960s and 70s, resulting in many people dying as a result. Altrad has a moral obligation to right some of this wrong, and donating to research would be a good start. They have so far refused to meet these demands, but the Clydebank Asbestos Group have been pushing forward with this campaign tirelessly, and they've recently attended protests at the Rugby World Cup, which features 2 teams which were sponsored by Altrad. I'll continue to push with the Clydebank Asbestos Group to see justice achieved from Cape, and the time is now to support victims. They can't wait any longer because time just isn't on their side. I'll soon bring a motion to Parliament on this issue with wording agreed with the Clydebank Asbestos Group and other campaigners, and I hope, like the motion today, it will receive the widest possible cross-party support. Action Mesothelioma Day serves as a chance to commemorate all those who have lost to this cruel disease. And in Clydebank, we have the International Asbestos Memorial, which sits in the centre of Clydebank in Truth and Justice Square. Also, the Clydebank Asbestos Group have recently opened an online memorial launched on International Workers' Memorial Day. The online memorial is open to anyone who would like to commemorate a loved one who has died from asbestos-related illness. This is such a great way to remember those we have lost, and I commend the group for this. Presiding Officer, we must deal with asbestos on all fronts, and we must support those who are diagnosed with mesothelioma and other asbestos-related illnesses by offering help when it's needed. And I promise that I'll continue to do everything in my power to work to achieve everything we can in our fight for truth and justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McNair. We will now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of up to 4 minutes. I call Bill Kidd to be followed by Pam Gozo.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I would like to thank Marie McNair for again bringing us today's debate marking Mesothelioma Day 2025, and I'd like to commend her long-standing commitment to this deeply important cause. On the 4th of July, we will once again pause to reflect, to raise awareness and, crucially, to demand action. Mesothelioma is a cruel and relentless disease. It's relatively rare, yes, but it's far from irrelevant. It is a cancer caused almost entirely by exposure to asbestos, those invisible fibres that embed themselves in lungs, silently wreaking havoc over decades. As we've heard, we are currently seeing around 200 cases annually here in Scotland, but behind every statistic is a family, a community, and often a story of unnecessary suffering. Tragically, the face of mesothelioma is changing. Where once it was seen largely in men who worked in heavy industry, shipyards, power stations and construction, we are now seeing more women, more young people, more individuals from non-traditional sectors, teachers, hospital workers, clerical roles, all exposed unknowingly and often decades ago. I want to recognise the work of Action on Asbestos, formerly Clydeside Action on Asbestos, a remarkable organisation that for over 30 years has stood by those affected, not just with practical support and legal advice, though they do that tirelessly, but also by working directly with NHS Scotland, funding specialist nurses and vital research to improve treatment and outcomes. The work is not only compassionate, it's critical. Presiding Officer, turning to the issue of the time bar in relation to asbestos-related conditions, well, the Damages Asbestos-Related Conditions Scotland Act 2009 rightly recognises that as asymptomatic conditions like pleural plaques, pleural thickening and asymptomatic asbestosis are actionable harms, we still face a serious problem. Under the current law, a person who has already claimed for an asbestos-related condition may find themselves barred from seeking further damages if they later develop mesothelioma, an incurable and life-limiting cancer. In recognition of this issue, the Scottish Law Commission, in its December 2024 report, recognised this, and I would like to put on the record my thanks to them for their comprehensive work on this issue. The recommendation is crystal clear. Asymptomatic conditions should not trigger the time bar for the later development of symptomatic conditions. I believe this to be a vital step toward fairness, and I welcome it. I have spoken to the Government on this very issue, and there is a need, perhaps even a duty, to consider whether a legislative amendment or regulatory action is required to address this loophole and to ensure that those living with mesothelioma are not penalised by legal technicalities. And on this issue, I would like to ask the Minister if she would consider meeting with myself and Marie McNair to discuss how we can progress this matter. Those affected do not have the luxury of time. They deserve dignity, clarity and justice. Presiding Officer, I close by paying tribute once again to the Clydebank Asbestos Group, to Action on Asbestos, and to every campaigner who has fought so hard, often while battling illness themselves. Let Action Mesothelioma Day 2025 not be just a day of remembrance. Let it be a day of renewed resolve to right the wrongs of the past and to protect future generations from a legacy that should never have been theirs and ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kidd. I now call Pam Gozo to be followed by Carol Morgan. Ms Gozo.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to thank Barry McNair for bringing such an important topic to the Chamber today. Action Mesothelioma Day is dedicated to raising awareness, a devastating disease that has affected many lives in Scotland and beyond. In 2022, there was 2,257 mesothelioma deaths in the UK, with a significant number occurring in Scotland. The industrial history of Scotland, particularly in shipbuilding and construction, has left a legacy of asbestos exposure, leading to high rates of mesothelioma. Over 70,000 of these deaths occur in individuals aged over 75, highlighting the long latency period of this disease. According to the Scottish Mesothelioma Network's audit report in 2023, the overall number of newly diagnosed mesothelioma patients in Scotland was 132, up from 127 identified by the 2022 audit. Behind these numbers are real people and their families, enduring immense suffering. Mesothelioma is not just a statistic, it is a painful reality for many. The symptoms are deliberating and prognosis of often grim. Patients and their loved ones face physical, emotional and financial hardship. Their stories beyond remind us of the urgent need for action and support. I have had the privilege of meeting with organisations specialising in mesothelioma, such as Clydebank Asbestos Group in my region of West of Scotland. Their dedication to supporting those affected by this condition is truly inspiring. They provide crucial services such as legal service advice, emotional support and advocacy for better healthcare services. Their work ensures that patients and their families do not face this battle alone. The Clydebank Asbestos Group offers a lifeline to many. They assist with navigating the complex legal landscape to secure compensation for victims. They also run support groups providing a space for individuals to share their experiences and find solace in a community that understands their struggles. Their advocacy efforts have led to improvements in healthcare policies and increased funding for this condition and research. Clydebank Asbestos Group have called for the safe and urgent removal of asbestos from all public buildings, as there is an increase in younger people and women diagnosed with this condition. In some of these cases, they have never worked in the traditional industries, usually associated with asbestos exposure, with some working in public buildings. Clydebank Asbestos Group are also a strong advocate of the Cape Must Pay campaign, which aims to make Atrod Cape pay £10 million towards this condition. Cape Intermediate Holdings was one of the largest asbestos companies in the world, and its asbestos product widely used in construction. The campaign has argued that these products are at the heart of the condition epidemic in the UK. However, the fight against mesothelioma requires more than the efforts of dedicated organisations. We need a concerted effort from the government to implement stricter regulations on asbestos and to fund research for better treatments. Public awareness campaigns are essential to educate people about the dangers of asbestos and the importance of early detection. In closing, Presiding Officer, let us honour those who have lost their lives to mesothelioma by committing to action. Let us support the organisations that are making a difference and call on the Scottish Government to take stronger measures. Together we can raise awareness, support those affected and work towards a future where mesothelioma is no longer a threat.
Thank you, Ms Gozo. I now call Cara Mochan to be followed by Jackson Carnell. Ms Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I begin by thanking Marie McNair for bringing forward this important debate, and on behalf of Scottish Labour welcome Action Mesothelioma Day 2025, which will be marked on the 4th of July. In the years I've been in Parliament, I am pleased to stand with Marie McNair and other members to play my part in joining and to raise awareness of this cruel condition, to call for further research and to call for this condition to be properly understood as an industrial injury. And of course, as we are all speaking about today in the Chamber, ensure that proper compensation is afforded to sufferers and their families. Mesothelioma is a rare and indeed hard to treat form of cancer, as stated in the motion, usually caused by exposure to asbestos. However, as we know, having debated this many times in this Parliament, despite asbestos being banned over a quarter of a century ago, many worked and continue to work in environments where it is present and where it was present, and it's still found in buildings right across Scotland, and we must address this issue. With 2,700 new cases diagnosed every year in the UK and 200 in Scotland, it remains of utmost importance that we raise awareness of the symptoms of this illness and encourage people to be cautious and have their symptoms checked, because identifying this illness quickly, as with other forms of cancer, can prolong life and ensure more pain-free management of what is a very cruel disease. I have known of this disease from a very young age, having grown up within a working-class mining community. Now, the most up-to-date data that I could find about my own home area in East Ayrshire showed that there had been significant numbers of mesothelioma deaths between the years of 81 to 2019, and that there had been a continuation of deaths past that date with this ongoing impact of asbestos exposure. But in thinking about this debate, I think it's important for me as a member in an area that has a high rate of asbestos to just make sure that we are properly diagnosing and properly documenting the rates of illness and death, and so I commit to doing that. The reality for the people in my area is that the industrial work of the early part of the last century, right up until the 80s and 90s, mainly mining, exposed particularly men to asbestos. But of course, as has been mentioned by other members, we know that the secondary exposure through clothing and washing, etc., often undertaken by women, really increased their risk as well. So many people who suffered exposure to asbestos during their working life have never received any serious compensation, often due to employers jumping through hoops to claim that the cause of their cancer can't be properly proven. And this is why the work of groups such as Clydebank Asbestos Group and Action on Asbestos and other community action groups are so important. The fight they undertake against big business is second to none, and we must always recognise this. We know that this condition conditions such as this exposes the approach of workers' health, it exposes big business and insurance giants. We in this place must be clear that people are worth more than this, and that the lives of working class people, those who have built and maintained our country, these men and women must be compensated should their life be impacted or lost due to the nature of their work. I, of course, welcome the Scottish Law Commission's report, as mentioned by Marie McNair, and it's an important step. But I do believe, although it is an important step, I fear there is more work to do, and I really call on the Minister today to give us some feedback, as Marie McNair had asked, to ensure that we keep fighting to get this right. But I want to also raise that it is important that we keep fighting for compensation, proper compensation, and of course, importantly, for proper health and safety within workplaces to ensure the rights of workers are at the centre of all that we do. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Morgan. I now call Jackson Carlisle to be followed by Richard Leonard. Mr Carlisle.
You know, I find it almost extraordinary. I think it's about 18 years since I first was able to contribute to a debate on mesothelioma, and in a debate then led by Gil Patterson, who was a predecessor of Marie McNair in Clydeside. And I do want to pay tribute to the Clydebank Clydeside Action Group. Their sustained focus and the fact that they turn out in numbers on this condition is really quite remarkable and to be commended, and the compassion that they bring to the work and to the lives of those who subsequently suffer. Isn't it extraordinary that this is yet another of those conditions like aortic aneurysms or Duchenne's disease that just seems to have a home all too tragically here in Scotland, with us as a nation enduring one of the highest incident rates of mesothelioma anywhere in the world. With 2,700 new cases each year, about 200 in Scotland. And when I last participated in a debate in all of this, little did I know that my own uncle would die of mesothelioma just a short time ago, a few years ago. Alan Carlaw was in the motor industry, as was I. They had the British Leyland franchise, we had the Ford franchise, proved to be more reliable of the two in the fullness of time. But these businesses, like so many others, were housed in architecture that was built back in a day when asbestos was a prevailing building material. And I can remember back in the 1970s when, as a business, we sought to clear these asbestos out of buildings, just how ridiculously they had been used as a manufacturing substance and how they deteriorated, and that sense that you could see the asbestos dust in the air. And so for those people who were involved in industries where that was absolutely part of their working day, where in good faith they built Scotland, not recognising that they were doing so around an environment which would subsequently kill them, is, I think, a great injustice and a huge tragedy, and not least because my uncle, like so many others, as pleural plaques did not manifest themselves into the disease until he was a much older man, decades after his exposure to them. And I don't know, maybe I have them too. I was in the motor industry, I don't know. But it was also such an unjust way for anyone to have to end their life, because it is an absolutely ghastly experience for those people who end up having to suffer and die of mesothelioma. And we know they drown effectively in great distress, and there is no soft answer and there is no cure. Presiding Officer, as an adjunct, in my own East Renfrewshire constituency, Leaf East, Renfrewshire and Eastwood and Leaf East, you might not imagine it, but it has the 4th highest ratio of mesothelioma deaths to road traffic deaths. And yet the public focus on road traffic deaths and road traffic management and road traffic prevention is huge. The public awareness of mesothelioma and the incidence that there still is every year in Scotland, and the fact that just because it's a Scottish disease, well, not just a Scottish, but because it's a disease that we find more incidence of in Scotland along with those others, should not be an obstacle to a renewed national effort to ensure that appropriate research is undertaken to seek to get to a point where there is a cure. The absence of a cure, the ongoing lack of awareness and energy and urgency behind it, I think are nothing short of a national disgrace. The people who built Scotland deserve better, and the people who now and may yet contract mesothelioma ought to think and know that there is a national effort being undertaken to make it possible for them to survive that disease should it manifest itself through the identification and implementation of a cure.
Thank you, Mr Carlisle. And I now call Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I remind members of my voluntary register of trade union interests? And can I thank Marie McNair for bringing this motion to Parliament today? Once again, she is acting not as an unconsidered representative of her party, but as a diligent and democratic representative of her constituents. Because the working class of Clydebank know better than anyone of the suffering caused by negligent industrial-scale exposure to asbestos at work. And let us be absolutely clear about this. This is not a debate about history. As we debate this motion in the Scottish Parliament this afternoon, and as we mark Action Mesothelioma Day on July the 4th, the number of asbestos-related cases in Scotland's communities is not falling, it is rising. The evidence from practitioners advising the Scottish Law Commission is that there are over 700 people diagnosed with pleural plaques in Scotland every year, and that this number may not have yet peaked, which is why the Scottish Law Commission's recommendation in its report published last December on damages for personal injury, which at last resolves the time bar problem, must now be enacted. By their own admission, the Law Commission draw heavily on the case made by Unite the Union, articulated by their solicitors, Thomsons, who in their submission argued this: individuals should not be disproportionately penalised for failure to raise court proceedings for a relatively minor injury when they go on to develop a serious and potentially life-threatening illness as a result of the same negligent act. So the Law Commission has made a strong and unambiguous recommendation, and the Scottish Government and this Parliament must act with the same clear thinking, with the same fortitude, and it must act without delay. Because for all of those families, all of those workers, enough time has already been wasted. And that is why I call on the Minister today in Parliament not to meet with me, but to give them an unequivocal guarantee that the Government will amend the Prescription and Limitation Scotland Act 1973 in line with the Scottish Law Commission's recommendation before the end of this Parliament. One of the greatest influences on my politics and in my life was my old friend and comrade Alex Falconer, a member of the European Parliament, a community campaigner, a socialist, a peace activist, a dockyard worker, and a trade unionist to his core. He won a test case in the late 1980s when he was diagnosed with pleural plaques after working with asbestos as a lagger in Rosyth Dockyard. I remember the two of us going to meet the Transport and General Workers Union's lawyers in Glasgow, going to meet Hugh Campbell QC in the splendour of Edinburgh's New Town, and then meeting him again on the steps of the High Court in Edinburgh just days later, to be told that the MOD had decided at the last minute not to defend the action. It was a test case in which the insurance industry was finally forced to recognise that a civil award for pleural plaques could be pursued, and to do so did not close the door on a later damages claim for mesothelioma. And sadly, that is exactly what happened in the life and then in the tragic death of Alec Falconer. So for many of us, Action Mesothelioma Day is not abstract. It is very real. And whether inside Parliament or outside of it, In that battle for justice, alongside the grassroots campaigners in Action on Asbestos and the Clydebank Asbestos Group, we will carry on. It remains painful, poignant and personal, but it is political as well, and so we will carry on. Striving, struggling, yielding to none, facing setbacks, but unflinching in our determination, in the name of all of those we have lost, we will carry on. We will never give up. We will always carry on. We will carry on.
Thank you, Mr Leonard. And I now call on Minister Jenny Minto to respond to the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too would like to thank my colleague Marie McNair for bringing this motion to the Chamber today and welcome the opportunity to close today's debate on mesothelioma. I would also like to recognise Ms McNair's long-standing support for her constituents and others that are living with the impact of asbestos. I also wish to acknowledge the valuable contributions from my colleagues here today, and I recognise the very strong feeling and cross-party support there is to Ms McNair's motion. Richard Leonard said this wasn't a history, this is happening now. And I think it's always important, as Bill Kidd and Carol Mochan took the time to explain the underlining history of meso, but also the impact that it's having now in the current time with different areas of the population. And I agree very much with Pam Gosel's comments around the lifeline support that the Clydebank Asbestos Group provide for those and their families living with meso. Their website has got a very simple, direct video that explains how they can provide great help and support to families. And also, Jackson Carlaw raises the very important point about these people built Scotland, and so therefore we have a responsibility towards them. And I was first introduced, as I may have said before in other responses to this debate, that I first became aware of it when my husband directed a film for BBC Scotland, and that was about 30 years ago, really raising the knowledge to a wider community. So from my heart, I thank those in the gallery for all the really powerful work that you are doing and holding us to account. On behalf of the Scottish Government, I recognise all those who are affected by this type of cancer, and not just the individuals themselves, but also their loved ones. Adjusting to a cancer diagnosis is never easy, and this can only be especially true for rarer cancers that can leave individuals feeling isolated and worried at an already distressing time. The Scottish Government is therefore committed to ensuring that people impacted by a cancer diagnosis receive person-centred and holistic care, and we work very closely with Macmillan to improve the service we can offer patients with the Transforming Cancer Care programme. Improving cancer survival is also a key aim of the Scottish Government's cancer strategy. We know that earlier detection can improve outcomes, and we've invested in several programmes to support the earlier detection of cancers. And a number of contributions noted the point that mesothelioma is a late diagnosis, and that requires much more research, which I'm very pleased that there are currently 4 active clinical trials open to recruitment that are related to meso in Scotland. The Assess Meso trial is specifically looking at collecting more information about people with meso. This will help researchers know more about symptoms and their impact on daily living so that we can improve care. The Meso Origins trial at the University of Glasgow is aiming to find out how benign inflammation develops into meso in people after exposure to asbestos. And the Extra Meso feasibility study is exploring how exercise therapy can improve symptom control, fitness and the quality of life to patients with meso. And lastly, which looks at the point that Jackson Carlaw was making, Another trial is looking at the effectiveness of a drug which specifically targets the build-up of fluid around the lung caused by meso, aiming to make breathing easier for those affected. And in addition, a core commitment within the Scottish Government's Genomic in Scotland strategy is the development of a sustainable and more reactive funding model so that we can expand access to genomic testing equitably across Scotland, keeping pace with the rapid rate of change. As many have spoken about in the debate today, we are all aware that exposure to asbestos in the past is known to be a major contributing factor in developing meso. As well as aiming to ensure that we prevent exposure to asbestos, which has been banned in the UK since 1999, and that appropriate medical care is in place for those who have been affected by asbestos exposure, the Scottish Government remains committed to ensuring that individuals have appropriate rights to compensation. And as Marie McNair, Richard Lenner, Bill Kidd and others have all noted, the current law on limitation, which sets time limits for raising court proceedings, can cause difficulties for people with meso through no fault of their own. They may find themselves in the position of being time-barred from raising civil proceedings, effectively being denied a legal remedy. The Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament have a strong record of supporting those who have been negligently exposed to asbestos. The law in relation to secondary exposure has developed over recent decades, and we're encouraged to see that those affected are increasingly recognised. The Scottish Law Commission, and I thank them for their work, published several recommendations for reform of damages for personal injury in December last year. These included recommendations to change the law of limitation regarding asymptomatic asbestos-related conditions. The Scottish Government is in support of these recommendations, and we have a proven track record of implementing Scottish Law Commission reports, with 4 bills introduced this season and a 5th to come. Where existing asbestos remains, there are licences required to work with it, and strict control measures are used, including personal protective equipment such as respirators. My colleague, as has been noted, Siobhan Brown, is looking forward to meet with Marie McNair and her constituencies. And I note, as she will, the comments made by both Richard Leonard and Mr Kidd. I am content to meet as well, but that specific element does not fit into my portfolio. And finally, I would like to give my sincere thanks to those providing valuable information, help and support to anyone affected by meso and asbestos-related conditions. I give my thanks to Meso UK for continuing to raise awareness each year on annual Action Meso Day. The Scottish Government will support Go Blue for meso by lighting blue St Andrew's House and Victoria Quay here in Edinburgh on the 4th of July. And I also want to mention again and give my special thanks to the Clydebank Asbestos Group and the work of the Less Survivable Cancers Task Force. The work of third sector, community and social care partners is critical in supporting those affected by meso alongside our NHS. So just to conclude, thank you very much for everyone that's taken part in today's debate, and I look forward to working with all of you to improve awareness, earlier diagnosis, treatment and clinical research and support Action Meso Day 2025.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate, and I suspend this meeting until 2 p.m. Thank you.